Hi, and welcome to What the Phalange, the podcast where we watch every episode of Friends, discuss it, deconstruct it, and fan over it, one episode at a time.
My name is Emilie, pronouns she and her.
And my name is Quinn, pronouns ze/zere or they, them.
This week we're talking about Season 2, Episode 3, the one where Heckles dies. So sad. This episode aired on October 5th, 1995. It was written by Michael Curtis and Gregory S. Malins. It was directed by Kevin S. Bright. Two people with S as middle names. I wonder what that name is.
Maybe it's the same name.
Maybe it's the same name.
In this episode, the annoying downstairs neighbor, Heckles, dies, and three main events transpire. Phoebe and Ross argue evolution versus creationism. Monica's control issues come out as she tries to prevent Rachel from furnishing their apartment with Mr. Heckles' very tacky lamp. And when Chandler starts to see his future ending up as Heckles, he goes into a state of existential crisis.
Which we are all going into during this past year. We're all feeling the existential crisis vibe. Well, welcome. Hi.
Hi.
Everyone. Hi, Quinn, because we
Hi,
are
Emily.
not actually in the same room as each other.
I know. How are you doing over there?
I'm doing great. Yeah, it's great. It's sunny. I'm very warm in this room. We're going to see how this goes. How are you?
I have no idea if it's sunny outside because I'm have all of my curtains down and I'm trying to pad all of my walls in order to try to get better sound quality than the last episode we had.
Yeah, well, same. I've got my curtains down too, but the sun is creeping through. Yeah, so this episode. So I was actually reading, and apparently a lot of people, I read just 5 or 6 random analyses of this episode, and most people were like, this is an average Friends episode. This is a medium Friends episode. And I'm like, what the hell? This is a great Friends episode. Well, it's not very comedic or blah, 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 blah. I'm like, yo, there's so much in this episode. I love this episode.
Yeah, this is a great Friends episode.
It's a really good character episode. You really start to get to know the Friends characters rather than a plot episode. Of course, my phone is ringing. Oh, I think it's done. Okay. Great.
Okay, so yeah, this is one of my favorite episodes, and it's actually an episode that I've referred to so many times over season 1 because I keep talking about Chandler going through a 10 season development, character development. Mm-hmm. And I would say that this is the moment déclencheur, the beginning of it all. This is where he goes, he sees himself in a way where he's he's made excuses for himself or been fine with being his angsty self. And then he sees this and he has a moment of seeing his future, and he's and this is
realization moment, self-awareness to a degree that we haven't seen in Chandler before. For
sure. And this is where he starts working on himself. Anyway, I want to get further into this later.
I think that if we were to really I'm thinking about this just in this moment, but if we were to really break down why I was stoked to do this podcast, I think this episode would have come to mind.
Interesting. Yeah.
This is an episode that is so character heavy in a way that I just haven't you haven't really necessarily seen. And this is the kind of stuff that I love to get into and deconstruct and talk about. So I'm really stoked to talk about this episode.
Yeah. And I find it, so it's interesting though, because when you say oh, this is a Friends episode, it's a casual Friends episode. In some ways, I'm this is kind of Friends in a nutshell in this episode, because it has a lot of really interesting character development things. All of the characters are very much themselves. They're very I really love the writing, the acting, the directing in this episode for each character to be very individual. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, in there you have so much layers of shit. You have the the very overt transphobic joke at the beginning. We have some overt fat phobia. We have like layers of issues with like the sexism, the patriarchy. Yeah. We have like the concept of like the crazy old man neighbor, and like what that means. Like we have, and like also then like a conversation of like science versus religion. And so like there's a lot in here, and there's like so much to talk about for us in this episode. And I have a feeling like we just are not like, because we're like, no, we have an hour to do episodes. We can't take longer than that, which we always do, but we try not to. Like, we're not going to be able to do this episode justice, I feel.
Yeah, for sure.
No matter what. But I just think that this is like a really, like, this is like when you say this is an episode that comes to mind when you thought of like creating this podcast, I agree with you. Like, this is like the quintessential Friends episode that comes to mind for all the reasons why we should do it, for all the reasons why we love Friends, and all the reasons that we need to be having these conversations.
Yeah, I agree. So enough talking about it. Let's talk about it.
Well said, Emily.
Okay, I want to say the three things that I want to talk about this episode. So we kind of just like basically touched on them, but I want to talk about Chandler's character arc, of course, and specifically in the way that it relates to incels. And so we'll go into that in a bit. I obviously want to talk about Ross and evolution, but specifically mansplaining as well. And obviously I also want to talk about that transphobic joke that comes through, as well as the debate of whether or not a joke that happened in this episode was sexist or not sexist, was like sexual or fat phobic. And we'll get there when we get there. But yeah, I think there's like debate. What do you want to talk about?
So I want to talk about like Heckles the neighbor, the concept of crazy, and like how they relate to Heckles. I think that's like something that will be interesting to pick apart. I really want to have a conversation about science versus religion.
It's gonna be an awkward one. We're gonna see how this goes.
Well, I think it's a really interesting one, and I think that people shy away from it a lot, and that's not helpful either. So, or like either shy away from it, or anyway, whatever. We'll get into it. And then I also want to talk about, like the concept of like the nuclear family, like relating into Chandler and like where some of his fears are coming from, like the concept of the nuclear family and having a life partner, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, totally. Okay.
Those are like the three main things. Obviously, I have a little sub list of like 5 other things, but you know.
Yeah, I've got like 86 things I really want to talk about, but we'll see how we got time. Okay, so let's go right into this cold open that is just, it's brutal. It is so brutal. Like literally I have my notes and I just like wrote like key events that happen in each scene. And this one I just put like transphobic joke, because there's literally nothing else really. Like obviously they're setting up the scene with Chandler who broke up with someone because like whatever stupid petty reason. And so like the patriarchy, but like really this scene is to set up this like really, really blatantly transphobic, can't even like argue your way around how transphobic this joke is.
Yeah, I mean, like, what's interesting about this specific one, actually, should we describe what happens?
Yeah, just in case people haven't watched this episode recently. So yeah, you can do that. Go for it.
So essentially, Chandler's explaining why, his shallow reasons why he doesn't like something, and then people are saying he's being too shallow, and then Joey's like, no, I kind of agree with Chandler, and like explains his once a shallow reason why he broke it off with someone, and it was because a girl he was dating, or was a great kisser, but had an Adam's apple, or had a very large Adam's apple, and oh man, I don't even want to like say it, but like. Yeah. And then essentially, someone else is kind of like, well, Joey, actually, like, women don't have Adam's apples, and and then Joey
90s logic.
Yeah, and then Joey like freaks out for a second there and is like, and then essentially everyone's like, actually, never mind, just kidding, haha, and he's like. And he's like, oh, thank God, kind of thing. Like all
Mm-hmm.
relieved that's anyway.
Yeah. Okay, I have a thought on this, and I just thought of it now.
Go ahead.
Part of me, okay, no, actually, no, I take it back. I don't have a thought. My thought was just like in the sense of like, were the writers self-aware enough to recognize that trans people exist in the world, and therefore some women have Adam's apples, or was the joke the idea that like Joey just didn't realize that he was dating a man? Like, is the joke that like he was dating a woman dressed like, or a man dressed as a woman, or is the joke that like Joey was straight up just dating a man? You know, like, this is what I don't understand. Like, is it supposed to be a gay joke?
No, it's definitely a transphobic joke.
Okay.
No, like,
Yeah.
and this is maybe the first joke of its kind, but there are several other jokes in Friends that have a similar like
Mm-hmm.
construct around it,
Yeah.
including, including like Chandler. Like, yeah, it's so like this kind of concept will come up again in future. And like, we can start breaking it down by like simply the concept. Like, if you want to like argue that this was a joke where it was like, oh, Joey was like this person that was actually a man, then there's like just like homophobia layered very heavily
Yeah.
in there, right? Like, how dare a man kiss another man? Isn't that
Mm-hmm.
a horrible thing?
Yeah.
And
But like that even wouldn't even be as like I really think they did write this as just a straight up transphobic joke. Like,
yeah, no, exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
then, but
for
then,
sure.
you, and then when we start
'Cause
exploring, like, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, because if you think about it, like the 90s, we saw a lot of movies. Maybe in the 80s, but I don't even think so. But like in the 90s, we saw a lot of movies with like the very classic trope of like trans sex worker. Like trans woman as a sex worker. And it was like both used as a comedic sort of thing, as well as used as um like a way to just shit on trans women and sex workers. Like there was like I'm thinking of quite a few movies in which that happens, where there's like a cop and he like his informant is a trans woman who's a sex worker, and like they're just like really playing into a lot of tropes around trans people, and like it's just overall transphobic. So I was thinking like for a moment, like were these writers self-aware enough even to recognize the fact that trans people exist in the world? And so like this was a gay joke, but no, like this was the 90s in which like there was a lot of conscious understanding of the fact that trans people existed. It was just they were always used as the butt of a joke. So yeah, no, I think this is just another classic 90s transphobic joke, to be honest.
Yeah. And just like, yeah. And
Yeah,
then,
it's just rough.
like always looping back to the fact that like, again, like David Crane is gay.
Yeah.
And, and again, talking about the fact, like, let's talk again about the fact that, like, being a cis, gay, especially white man, like, there's so much privilege that comes from that. And really, all of that, all of the fight that has happened to, like, give gay, cis, white men all the, like, the acceptance that they have has really come from trans women of color. It's
Mm-hmm.
been, and anyway, so it's like
The majority of what we have in the world today
yeah,
mostly comes from women of color in general. Like just
yeah,
honestly, like they've been the one who have rallied the majority of the things that we can, exist and be happy in, the
yeah,
comforts that we have today. Whether
yeah,
you are queer or not, whether you're a woman or not, whether you're a person of color or not. It's yeah, when you start to really dive into it, there's a lot of like things like, you know, the Time's Up movement, the Me Too movement was actually all started by like women of color, but have been like taken over by, you know, white women. And anyways, we could go on a tangent.
Yeah.
But yeah, so.
And I guess like the main thing, like I don't really have a lot of like emotional energy, I feel, to actually like go too much further into this joke. But I feel like as someone who is trans, I just like want the world to know that like these are the types of jokes that make me hate the fact that I'm trans. And like these are the types of jokes that like make me hate myself, and like that I have to like actively unpack and actively like work to not like just collapse into that part of hate. And so and I know that this is like a very common thing. Like a lot of trans folks have internalized transphobia, and these are the jokes that cause that. So anyway.
Yeah, and writing is powerful, and the media we consume is so powerful, which is why we created this show to begin with. And it's like you hear this joke and it affects you because this is pop culture. This is our culture. And so,
it's
you know,
like,
people
it's
who
like
say
stating,
it's just a joke, it's just, you can't remove the joke from the actual social constructs that exist and real oppression that people face, for sure.
Yeah, it's like stating the standard of society, right? Like what is normal is essentially like it's being normalized by making it into this episode. And anyway, moving forward.
Yeah. Can I just say one quick thing about this episode that was about this scene that was actually not terrible?
Sure.
There's a slight continuity thing that happens in this episode in which you can see that they're all playing poker at the beginning of the episode. So they're all sitting around the coffee table playing poker. And I even was looking on fandom and someone was like, it actually looks like Rachel is winning. So I'm like, yeah, Rachel's learned her poker skills.
I think that's actually really great.
That continuity from season 1 is great.
But in the next scene, Heckles, they're all like hanging out in the kitchen, and Heckles knocks on the door and starts giving them a hard time, or Mr. Heckles is what we should be calling him, I guess. I don't know. And you know, I love Rachel in this scene and in this conversation where like we're still dealing with like this is like young Rachel, you know, like, and where she's like trying to be tough, and she's a bit of a badass, right? Like she can stand up for herself, but there's also like I'm just like Rachel in season 10 is like just so different, you know, like
spoiler.
Rachel's still in season 10. Yeah, and anyway, so but then how this scene ends is them like all like trying to like bang on the floor because Heckles is giving them a hard time with a broomstick from below them.
Yeah.
And then split to the next scene, and you have Heckles in a body bag being shimmied out, rolled out of the apartment.
So okay, I want to say one thing about the last scene though.
Yeah.
And I told you this. I made you pause it while we were watching because like I had this like brief moment of being shocked by my own feelings. Where like there's this moment where Ross is sitting at the table and he's like kind of leaning back and he's holding a beer. And I actually wrote that like Ross actually kind of looks hot in that moment. And I was like, oh my God, am I like attracted to Ross? What is happening? And I literally like, I think it's a brief moment because the next moment I'm just not anymore. But like just the way he's seated and he's drinking his beer, you know, he's like a bad boy. And I'm, you know, into it. I'm into it. I'll take it. But I think last episode we talked about how we're not attracted to them. And then I was watching this episode and I was like, I'm kind of attracted to them in this episode. Like I wrote a couple times that like some of them like do a hot thing. So I'll tell you the few other things that I find hot in this episode.
Please. Yeah, I want to know.
Mostly it's just Monica and Rachel because, you know, and Phoebe also. Anyways. Okay, moving on. Heckles is dead. This is the first time we see Trigger, so their superintendent.
Yes, first time ever, which is I didn't even realize that he wasn't in the first season until this episode.
I know, me neither. Yeah, so that's sick. We meet Trigger.
It's also a great intro to him.
Back.
Yeah, spoiler alert, he comes back.
Yeah,
There's a great intro to him where he's like, he must have been sweeping. It just, like I was sweeping yesterday. Could have been me.
Yeah, so good. And I think like it's important to note, like, I feel as maybe we can cut this out if I'm wrong, but like, was Trigger eating something in this scene?
Yeah, he was eating a donut.
See, this is like, so again, classic, like, fat phobia without actually being fat phobic. Like, this, like, fat people are always eating trope, and fat people are always eating quote unquote unhealthy foods. You know, like, I think that, and we see a lot more fat phobia come through in the seasons to come with when it comes to Trigger. Well, when it comes to all of them, to be honest. But like, I think that's just like an important thing to note, is that like so often when you see, and like we in season 1 when they all went to the emergency room because Ross got that puck in his face, the nurse who was manning the front desk, she was eating a chocolate bar and calling up about a chocolate bar.
Right. Yeah.
So it's, again, that trope of like people who are in bigger bodies, people who are fat are constantly eating, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. Not cool. Not cool.
Yeah. And it's just like these little subtle microaggressions that like are really easy to not pick up on. But when they're continuously there, we like subconsciously like absorb them and then believe it to be true,
100%. Yeah, for sure. All right, so then we start getting into some meat of this episode where, Heckles is dead. Phoebe is, we get to see another side of Phoebe where she's like her little ethereal self. We saw in the first episode where she was like cleansing Ross's aura, and now we see this like where she definitely believes in an afterlife. This is obvious to her. Phoebe has never really declared herself as being religious, but spiritual is definitely an aspect of Phoebe's character, right? Like she's a very spiritual, ethereal kind of person. And so obviously she has this moment where she's like, sometimes they need help. They need to go into the light. And everyone scoffs at her, which like I can imagine that would be really, really tough for Phoebe. But she stands up for herself in a really great way here. She's just like, okay, sure. Like, you don't have to believe me, but there's lots of things that like, I don't believe that are true, or like, I don't believe that people think or common knowledge or blah, 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 and then we get this excellent moment of her.
I don't believe in like, I don't believe in the Bermuda Triangle or crop circles or evolution.
Well, she puts them in the same like category. It's so great.
And I love Ross's reaction, and I also love like Joey and Monica on the couch like kind of look at each other in this really playful way of like,
good.
Oh damn, this is gonna be entertaining.
One thing that I want to bring up here is that I think it's like it's really interesting to see the way that Ross kind of like freaks out, and like part of it is just like Ross feeling this need to always be right, as Phoebe points out later on. Yeah. But it's also like, can you imagine having like your whole life work, like literally your exact career and your job and everything that you do for a living is like this very specific thing, and then finding out one of your friends doesn't even believe at all in any of the work that you do? Like, I can imagine that'd be pretty jarring, right? Like, Ross is a paleontologist. Like, it's literally his job. He studies evolution, and finding out that one of his friends doesn't believe in evolution. Like, I can imagine him being like, how the hell did I never know this? Like, how did I just never know that like one of my best friends doesn't believe in my job? Like,
that's actually very true. Yeah. Where, it's kind of like, wait, how did I not know this?
Yeah.
Do I know you at all?
Exactly. Okay, but then the attorney shows up in this scene, right?
Right. And okay, wait, first of all, I want to point out, so in this scene, Phoebe is sort of like, do you feel like, I feel like I'm being more pushed by gravity rather than being pulled. And I just want to point out that 14% of our of the people who answer our polls said that they felt like they were more being pushed.
Those are the people also having existential crisis during this pandemic. No, for sure. Yeah, and then we get a great line from Chandler there, where like the attorney knocks on the door, and Chandler goes, "Uh-oh, it's Isaac Newton," and he's pissed. So good, so great. Mm-hmm.
So turns out that Rachel and Monica, the noisy girls upstairs, were left all the earthly possessions of Mr. Heckles because he has no family. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that it was actually probably not a gesture of love and care, but more a very, very sweet revenge from the grave.
Shout out to Mr. Heckles for still being petty after his death.
I also want to point out, though, that, like, if ever anyone is to be, like, offered an inheritance randomly, maybe you want to get, like, yourself a lawyer, because the thing is that, like, you don't have to accept an inheritance.
Yeah, you don't have to.
And so, like, they really could have, figured out what the inheritance was, assessed it, and then figured out if they wanted to accept it or not. Because if Mr.
they
Heckles
definitely
had
signed. Yeah, they definitely signed, like, right there in the kitchen, and then
right,
no,
exactly. Mm-hmm. Which was why I'm saying, like, don't ever do this. This is not a good example.
Yeah, so then they get down to Heckles' apartment, and obviously they see that it's a fucking disaster. Yeah, it's interesting because, we could probably start talking about this now, like, this concept of Heckles being, crazy, et cetera, et cetera. But also, like, this very real concept of like hoarding, which it seems as though, Heckles must have been at least a little bit of a hoarder. And I think that hoarding is something that gets like, that people joke a lot about. Like, people are like, oh yeah, they're a hoarder, like, and in kind of this like funny way. But like, hoarding is actually like a mental illness, and like, it's something that people really struggle with, and usually is a result from like some form of very real psychological trauma. And so like, it's not necessarily funny. It's not funny. Like, it's not even not necessarily. It's just not funny. And so like, I think that, the way we see that evolve with just this whole joke of Heckles being crazy.
Yeah, and Friends does a lot of sort of like labeling people and, crazy, and using it as a way to sort of like write off the person as a whole. Mm-hmm. And I guess I want to point out that like, yes, they had like a personal issue with basically how he was like communicating with them and giving them a hard time, and like he does come back in like a flashback episode, and like he has given them a hard time. Well, I mean, it's a flashback, whatever. I'm like, calm down.
Sorry,
and it's like he has like been a nuisance in their life, and so like there is like a certain amount of personal issues there of like, you keep infringing on my boundaries. But at the same time, like, so it's a right to like want to have your boundaries respected, but writing off a person as a whole by labeling them as crazy, and devaluing them as a human, devaluing their life as a whole, is not an okay thing to do.
Yeah.
And we're going to see this more as the episode goes on, as Chandler's crisis unfolds. So, Emilie, question. If we were moving in together, which would you prefer that we live with? The seashell lamp or the booby clock?
It's funny because I think I clicked the lamp when I was doing the poll, but then I was thinking about it and I was like, I don't know. I feel like that booby lamp is pretty great. That booby clock is pretty great. Like, the seashell is like they're both terrible, but the seashell lamp is like really big and obvious, and like, but like it's like one of those things where like it could take itself seriously. You know what I mean? like if someone could see that and be like, oh, like this person thinks that this looks nice, as opposed to like the booby clock is like very obviously tacky and like obviously ridiculous, So I feel like I would settle on the clock because it just feels as though it is like more of the like, it's more distasteful.
Yeah, I feel like
tacky.
I feel like that clock, I swear to God, is like almost exactly like a clock that our grandpapa had in his office, like his study.
Oh my
And
God.
then it just feels like someone bought like a dollar store knockoff Barbie and then just like glued it to the clock.
I'm just like
And
imagining the person in the props department who was in charge of putting that
I
together.
know. That's what I kept thinking this entire episode too.
That's so funny.
Well done, whoever you were. Well done.
Props to you.
Bah. Anyway, 55% of people on the poll said that they preferred the seashell lamp over the booby clock.
Interesting. That's
I know.
a close runner up though.
It was also a
That's a
close
tight
run. It
race.
kept going back and forth, and then for a long time it was just like split in the middle, and then, when it was over, lamp just edged clock out,
Okay, so then we find Heckles' big book of grievances. And obviously we get, it wouldn't be a Friends episode without without a gay joke about Chandler. Yeah, and so obviously there's this moment where, everyone's like, or like, Joey, Italian guy, brings home a date or whatever, and then Chandler, Italian guy's gay roommate brings home laundry. Which, like, if it wasn't the Italian guy's gay roommate, it would have just been hilarious that, like, Joey's bringing home a date and Chandler's bringing home laundry. It's just so great,
I know, right?
But yeah, of course, like, they have to throw in that, everyone thinks Chandler's gay, ha 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 ha, because being gay is such a funny thing and it's the butt of a joke. And, a man being perceived as gay is, like, the worst thing that you could possibly be perceived as, blah, blah, blah. So it's boring. Like, I just find, like, it comes up so often in this show that I just find it gets to a point where it's, like, it's not funny. And it's just like, okay, we've heard this joke before,
Yeah, that's
But,
fair.
Mhm.
And so this is where, like, Chandler starts to, like, freak out and then ends up having a moment where he, like, turns into Heckles.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, which I think is, like, hilariously very well done.
Yeah.
Where he, like, ends up, like, grabbing the broom and, like, hits the ceiling.
Bah.
And then it's like, yeah, bah!
So good. Yeah, again, his, like, body acting here. Like, I feel like we talk about that a lot, but Chandler's body acting is unreal in this show. Just the way that he performs everything with his whole body, and you're convinced just because of the way he's moving. Yeah, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love Chandler. Honestly, I do.
Yeah. Didn't we say at one point that you were Chandler?
I think I totally am Chandler. I'm just gonna bring this up because we're talking about Chandler in general right now. But I've like been thinking a lot about how I feel like Ross, gets this reputation as being like the nice guy who like wants to settle down, have a family, et cetera, et cetera. And like we've obviously kicked that one in the butt. If you're still listening to this show after, a season and a bit in which you think that like we're gonna stop shitting on Ross, like you've got it wrong. But like I think that Chandler, yes, he's sarcastic. Yes, he could be like kind of a dick to his friends, but I think that like Chandler actually is the one that has a lot of emotional self-awareness, and we'll see as the seasons go on a lot of like recognition of that, of his own emotional trauma, et cetera, et cetera. Like,
Yeah.
he makes self-deprecating jokes a lot, and his self-deprecating jokes come from a place of understanding that like he is mean because of this stuff that's happened to him.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas
And
like Ross has the opposite, where like he's
the nice
comes
guy.
off as being nice, but like doesn't actually have the self-awareness of recognizing the harm that he causes, with his arrogance, with his blah blah blah, And so I find it interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting because with Chandler also, like, you've had an entire season and 2 episodes where they've basically set up this character of him having the awareness of him being kind of mean, using humor as like a tool to like deflect, is very sarcastic. People have a hard time with him, like he's aware of that. Like, but this is like the first episode where he sees it in a new light where he's like, oh, I have this self-awareness, but now I actually see, like, I have a reason that I want to change. Like, I see if I were to just stay static like I have been doing, like he's having like this vision of a certain life that he doesn't want to end up having. And then it's like from this point forward, he's like, I know these things about me, but now I actually want to kind of like overcome them in certain ways so that I can have the life that I actually want in the end game. And I find that very, very interesting. And I very often wonder, because I love this character development so well. And I'm just gonna like kind of bounce around here in the episode, like just like
go for it.
you know how the end of the episode ends, and he's like, you know, circling back and is sort of like can't get over, you know, how big he thinks his date's head is. And it's just, I think it's just so well done that I kind of almost wonder if like this character was based off of like a real human, you know, like how it's sort of like he is a certain way, he has a hard time with himself, he has reason to change, but like that change is not going to happen overnight. And it's like,
totally.
And it's a change that you see very gradually happen over like 10 seasons. And it's the type of change that's very like reflective of real life, where like in certain ways people never change, you know, like there's an essence of someone that stays the same, but he manages to like cultivate different tools and like ways of thinking and communicating and working on himself in a way that he can change in the ways that matter for him to like achieve what he wants in his life, and like and like have the relationships that he wants in his life, and find that like fulfillment and connection and love that he's looking for, that he, you know, doesn't feel like he deserves, you know, and because of, you know, his past trauma. And I find that that's like, it just feels very real, like a very real representation that I kind of wonder if it actually is based on a real life human, you know?
Yeah. It's also like, so yeah, I'm gonna keep bouncing around with you here. Like, I do find this scene at the end very interesting. It makes me think of like a quote or whatever, I don't know, something that I read on like a Tumblr thread, lol, Tumblr, but it was like something along the lines of basically like the first thought you have in your mind is what you've been ingrained to think, what you've been taught to think. The second thought that comes after is like your own self-awareness and like who you are and what you are trying to become. And like I find that interesting in this scene where like you can hear Chandler being like, oh my God, this person's got a big head. Oh my God. And then he's like, okay, but you know what? There's other things that are great about this person. Like, you know, that she's this and she's this, you know. I should point out that he only names physical aspects of her. And like, and I think that it's interesting that like he does have this self-awareness where he's like, okay, this is my old way of thinking. I'm working on this. And I appreciate that, because like you said, it's not going to happen overnight. It is work. We're all work in progress, right?
And it's going to happen with practice, right? It's sort of like the first thought being like the socialized thought, the one that you've been like taught to think, is going to, you know, it's going to take a long time of you practicing your own personal thought on top of that to either unwrite the other one or be more okay with the one that you have over the one that is immediate, you know?
Totally. And I think that like the important thing is not necessarily that initial thought, but the work that we're going towards, and that self-growth and becoming, you know, aware and more aware, because like, you know, like we are taught so much shit. Like we are taught, you know, like specifically with this scene in which, you know, Chandler is like, you know, not into this person because, you know, she's got a big head. And I think like this comes up a lot in conversations about like the attractiveness of people being attracted to specific people. And like there's often this concept of like where people will be like, well, you know, I can't control who I'm attracted to, so I'm just like, I'm not attracted to like fat women, or I'm not attracted to black women, or whatever it is. And it's like, okay, you were taught not to be attracted to these people. And it's like you were taught that a specific kind of beauty is valued. And so you've been taught like a white supremacist, like thin, able-bodied view of beauty. This is what like society teaches us and what we are told is beautiful. And so like it's your job to deconstruct that in your mind. Like it's not, you know, like you need to start to develop that self-awareness to recognize that you've been taught that like this is quote unquote beautiful and this is not beautiful. And so like this is your job. This is part of like deconstructing the white supremacist in your mind, deconstructing the patriarchy in your mind, the deconstructing the, you know, whatever in your mind. It's like that's your job to do. And this is the work that we're doing in our lives, you know? So I think that that's interesting in this scene where it's like he is recognizing his own thought process and how he's attracted to someone. And he is pushing through that. You know, obviously it's like written out to just be really funny, but I think like we can look at it in a little bit more of a deeper sense, you know?
Yeah, especially because it's like we have seen the entire 10 seasons. We do know like that this is literally like the beginnings, and I think it's cute. You know what I mean? Like like here we go. Let's try, Chandler. Let's try.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, but can we just keep talking about Chandler for a little bit?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so as things like progress through the episode, you know, you have Chandler who's like essentially like he has a freak out essentially, right? Where you know, for I think his first one where he kind of spirals is when he's talking to Joey in this like very next scene, you know, where he like stays up all night. Joey finds him in Mr. Heckles' apartment, you know, like memorabilia like askew around him, and him somehow like having like, you know, like big bags under his eyes and a little bit of like, you know, 5 o'clock shadow on his face. And he's like, Joey, will you, you know, invite me to Christmas or whatever, you know, because he sees himself in Mr. Heckles, and he's like worried that he's going to end up alone and end up without a partner, without a family, and like no one to turn to during the holidays and spend time with. And I mean, he is, you know, an only child. He his parents are divorced, and he's kind of alienated from them. He doesn't like them very much. And I guess like I just want to point out that it's like interesting that like although like wanting family is totally a valid thing, like this nuclear family concept is also like such a problem, right? Because like it's almost like disheartening, because it's like we have this whole show that's like 10 years of people kind of like demonstrating what chosen family can really look like, you know?
Yeah.
And like like in this moment, he's like talking about it as though like this is temporary. This isn't forever. Like this is like for one stage in our lives as we find, you know, our, you know, life partner, and then go like sequester, if that's the right word, off like on our own into like our white picket fence in the suburbs where, you know, we are each individually far apart from each other and maybe never talk again as we raise our own families away from each other. And it's just like I don't know. Do you want to chime in here and like what?
Yeah, sure.
The problematic aspects of that, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Like this idea of valuing a romantic pursuit and a romantic relationship above all other relationships leads to just very isolated communities, or not even communities, just isolated people. And it definitely plays. First of all, it's like it's also a very heteronormative trope. It's a very, you know, and I think that. Yeah, anyway, that's a conversation for another time. But I do feel as though it's hard because, you know, you did lay that foundation, which is the fact that like he doesn't have family, you know, and he has felt isolated his whole life already. And his biggest fear right now is that like his friends and family are going to go off and like his friends are going to go off and get married and he's going to be alone. And so it's interesting because it's like, you know, being alone can take many forms, you know, and so it's hard to know whether or not this is Chandler striving for a nuclear family or if this is just Chandler trying not to be alone, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
that's a really good way of putting it.
Only thinking that being like the only solution to being alone is being with a romantic partner, as opposed to recognizing that there's more than one way to not be alone, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And if we didn't have this sort of systemic structure in our society, there would be so much more space for people to not have to put the weight of not being alone on finding a life partner, you know?
Yeah,
and
totally.
and that like that is a problem, especially then when we start like diving further into it and like and basically like pointing out that like there is a certain amount of like in society we value people more who are partnered and do have a family and have that very like nuclear dynamic, right? And it's like, and
100%.
you know, if you need example for that, you know, most politicians who are going for like higher rankings, like they basically need to be in a like married relationship the majority of the time in order to like basically be going after these types of positions because they won't be respected otherwise.
Lol, unless you're a woman, in which case you just aren't allowed to have children because then you're going to be too emotional and your children are going to take up your job.
Yeah, but then if you don't have children, then you might be about to have children soon and therefore will be having a newborn and pregnant and therefore won't be able to be committed because you'll have a newborn. So at all times, you may or may not be too committed to your children or not children that you are going to have in order to be able to do anything else.
You can't love your children too much or hate your children too much. That is just the way it works.
Oh my God.
Classic. But
we laugh.
Speaking of the patriarchy, I do want to bring up the fact that, like, you know, we are talking about Chandler in like this nuclear family concept, et cetera, et cetera. I also want to bring up, like I said at the beginning of the episode, just this, like very briefly, I'll bring it up, just this concept of incels. So if you're not familiar with the term incels, I want to tell you to Google it, but also I don't want you to Google it. But incels is like, it stands for involuntarily celibate. So it's basically this alt-right, usually white supremacist, usually or always very, very sexist kind of fringe group that has started, I believe it started on Reddit, and it's people who self-identify as involuntarily celibate. It is men who feel as though women are not sleeping with them, and basically they're mad about it. And so it comes with this idea of like, men are owed sex, and as long as you're a quote unquote nice guy, you should be allowed sex. And we've unpacked the nice guy concept a lot in this show, but specifically incels take that like a step further. This idea that, again, women owe you something. I think Chandler really breaks it down in that one phrase that he has, in which he says, I reject anyone who's even crazy enough to go out with me, and then I bitch about how there's no good women out there. And that's kind of sums up the concept of incels in general, is this idea that like constantly believing that women are out to get you when it's actually your behavior that is causing women to not want to be with you. It's an interesting thing that he has this self-awareness, and he's like basically like, I don't want to be this person. Like, I don't want to live in this bitterness that exists that turned Mr. Heckles into Mr. Heckles. Like, I don't want to live in this bitterness, you know, that comes with believing that everyone is out to get you. And he's like almost fighting this in himself. He's fighting this, you know? So anyways.
Yeah, for sure.
Chandler.
In the strain of thought, just to like normalize this, you know, if you can't find someone who wants to sleep with you, that's why sex workers exist. It's you know, you can call someone up and pay someone to have sex with you. So just go do that.
That's not only why sex workers exist. But yes, that is
Right,
one of the roles that sex workers can play. Yeah.
But it is like an industry that exists, and it's like can directly resolve this situation. And also, if you get blacklisted from sex workers, it's because you were being shitty. And so you go to therapy. Is really the moral of the story here.
Conclusion. Go to therapy. Which we should also, oh my God, can we use this excellent segue to start talking about Ross?
Ross, go to therapy.
Speaking about going to therapy, let's talk about Ross.
Okay, let's do this. So we have Ross and Phoebe who are, well, Ross more that is arguing with Phoebe. I feel like Phoebe is very casually not trying to actually have a discussion about this. But Ross keeps pushing it. And he's like very much in need for Phoebe to like believe what he believes and like agree with him. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And should we quote Phoebe in the... let's... What is your obsessive need to have everyone agree with you? Maybe we should put the microscope on that. Did I say it right?
Maybe we should put Ross under the microscope.
Yeah, okay, there we go.
So good. But yeah.
Which was like a very subtle, nice way of being like, Ross, maybe you should go to therapy.
Yeah. So good. I love Phoebe in this episode. And speaking of the patriarchy, I think like this entire, I know you want to talk specifically about like evolution versus creationism, but just talking about more of the concept of like Ross really trying to explain something to Phoebe and Phoebe just like, I don't really care. I think it's like a very interesting view of like mansplaining, in which like a man is like feels the need to tell you and teach you and like, he has to get his point across, and Phoebe just being like, I don't actually care about this, and like her just like not really giving a shit and just like
I don't know, just don't.
Yeah, I don't know, just don't, and I think the way that it like expands and it takes it to the next level, like where she like basically destroys him at the end, which is so good. Phoebe is so good. Like to me, it like represents that feeling of like, constantly having people try to mansplain, or men try to mansplain you something, and you just being like, fuck you.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think like one of the big things here is that also like Phoebe doesn't like, she even says that she's like, I don't disagree with evolution, or she's like, I don't deny evolution. I just don't I don't fully believe in it. Like, like I think that there could be other answers there. And I find that like really interesting because it's like of all people, like she's not the one that you want to like. That's not really a problem. I guess okay, it's less that I want to talk about evolution versus creationism, but it is a part of it. I guess I want to address like the concept of like science versus religion or spirituality as a whole, because I feel like this is something that like either you have like either the conversation is shut down really easily in that like, one person states what is right or wrong, and there's no like room for actual like dialogue in between, or you have like people who shy away from it entirely. And I think that that's like not like both of those are not fully helpful, though I understand like why those like things have led to it happening that way. And I think I want to like pull up our polls here for a second. And I want to point out that, so when we polled everyone for like, do you believe in evolution? Everyone who answered the polls, yes, do believe in evolution. But what I find very interesting is that out of those same people, we have 20% who believe in creationism. And when I look, okay. Yes, I know, right? And so when I looked at it, it was actually the same people who had said that they were like believe in evolution and also believe in creationism. And so okay, I want to give some like general context here. I'm going to go into a thing here, okay? So I have very much been the typical very angry anti-religion especially anti-Christianity queer. Up until about maybe like a year and a half ago, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, when life sort of lined things up where I became very good friends, like very beloved friends with 3 people who were, pastors, and Christian. And it's very much changed my perspective of how I want to be having conversations about these things.
For the record, I just want to pop in here and say that I've always wanted to create a sitcom based on this living situation you were in. Quinn was living with 2 other queer humans, and they were living in an apartment above 3 pastors. 3 pastors living underneath 3 queer humans.
And when
How is that
pastors,
not a sitcom?
There was lots of really incredible conversations. And so one thing that I want to bring up is that, not everyone who's Christian, but there's a lot of folks who are Christian who actually believe in both evolution and creationism, and how like evolution does not have to eradicate the concept of creationism, and same with the other way around. And I guess like, and then I also at the same time through like conversations and whatnot have come to like understand how having very like science shuts out space for possibility and space for conversation and space for nuance can actually be very harmful, alienating, and even polarizing. And and being able to have the space where kind of like what Phoebe ends up doing, where she has a conversation where she's like, I don't deny evolution.
Let's play the clip on this one.
Before you even start, I'm not denying evolution, okay? I'm just saying that it's one of the possibilities.
It's the only possibility, Phoebe.
Okay. Ross, could you just open your mind like this much? Okay? Now, wasn't there a time when the brightest minds in the world believed that the Earth was flat? And up until 50 years ago, you all thought the atom was the smallest thing until you split it open and this whole mess of crap came out. Now, are you telling me that you are so unbelievably arrogant that you can't admit that there's a teeny tiny possibility that you could be wrong about this?
When she's pointing out the fact that science has A, evolved, and B, is constantly correcting itself. If we just shut down the possibility for things that exist outside of it, it's not helpful. And I guess I want to point out that I've had many conversations with people being on 2 completely different pages, being able to converse and get to the same heart of a point, while still having what seemingly contrasting beliefs. And I think that that's something really important to continue to hold on to and consider when entering in these types of conversations. We don't have to actually change anyone's mind like Ross is doing in this conversation. We don't have to have all the exact same beliefs, because the details of how we get to a certain place is actually not as important as us getting to that same communal space. And I think that if we let the details go a little bit, that we'd have a much easier time getting there. And I think that is the most important takeaway from, or what I feel is the takeaway from this conversation in this episode. And I think it's a really beautiful, really almost powerful discussion that happens, and something that maybe we can bring into our own lives, essentially. That being said, I also think though that there are lots of people out there exploiting others on the basis of without having any real scientific backing of like, like basically doing things and exploiting people and convincing them that it's real, and it basically having no scientific backing and it actually being very harmful. But yeah, I guess that's like one of the main things that I wanted to bring up on this like topic.
I know, that's great. Let's talk about the fact that Janice shows up because she's amazing.
Yes.
I love Janice so much. She is the best human in the world. So yeah, Chandler has this existential crisis, calls Janice. Okay, wait, sorry. What were you saying?
Well, I was going to say, I also love how they make fun of Janice at the front, like the beginning of this episode. And then Janice comes into the episode. Like,
they like foreshadow her presence.
Yeah,
I love it.
I love it.
Yeah.
And I also just love it when like characters like try to recreate other characters on a show. Anyway, it's really good. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's great. No, I was just gonna say this moment where like Chandler leaves Heckles' apartment and he's like, I'm not gonna be this person. I'm gonna do something. And like he goes upstairs and like enters the apartment and calls Janice. I don't know if you notice the music that's playing when that happens.
Hi.
Okay, honestly, Quinn, you have to go back and listen to this later. It sounds like an 80s detective show music. Like, it's like, what is happening here? Like, he's doing something like really intense and dramatic, And then he's like, he calls Janice. It's like okay, chill. But anyways, yeah. And it's funny because I was reading on Fandom and someone was like, I want to quote Fandom here, that Janice's prophecy from the episode, the one with the candy hearts, comes true as Chandler is the one to call her.
Yeah.
Because when he breaks up with her, she's like, that's fine. Like, you're going to call me, et cetera, et cetera. And then here he does. He comes after her. It's great.
That is really great. I also think what's really great is how she didn't tell him over the phone and had her sweet, sweet revenge of all of his horrible breakups with her and all of him like tossing her around, that, that she gets to show up and see the look on his face.
Yeah. Janice likes to have her fun.
Oh man, I love it.
So good. And then of course we get like, it wouldn't be our show if we didn't call out Joey on his fat phobic joke here.
Right.
Where he says, oh, look how fat she got. Like, this is supposed to show that Joey is stupid. Like, it's supposed to be like this.
Yeah,
like,
so there's so many.
Joey doesn't understand that she's pregnant. Ha 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 ha.
Yeah.
But like, it's also just comes off as like, you think being fat is this like terrible thing. And like, you shouldn't, even if she had gained, 40 pounds or whatever, like, fuck off. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but anyways, it wouldn't be our show if we didn't call out Joey being a dick.
Exactly. I also want to point out here that, like, again, so like before she directly shows up, like getting further into the fact that like, what is Chandler's motives here? And in this moment, it's like he suddenly is like, I need to settle, is essentially it, right? Mm-hmm. Like his reasons for wanting to get back together with her is like, because she's smart and pretty and she cares for him. Not like, I like her. But I guess.
Interesting.
And so I guess.
I'm wondering. I didn't see it that way. That's funny. I thought of it as more in the lines of like, this is someone that like I obviously have gone back to multiple times before. There's a reason for that. Like I've just been complaining and not into her because I think she's like annoying or whatever, but like that's not reason enough. And so I'm going to call her up. Like I thought it was part of his arc of being like, it's not a reason, like it's not a good reason not to date her, Interesting.
I don't see it that way. I see it as like in this moment of panic of like fearing that he's going to end up like Heckles. He feels the need to like resolve the issue immediately and finds like the easiest solution that he possibly can. And that solution,
you're right. I didn't think
Janice.
of it that way, but you're totally right.
And it's sort of like this situation where it's like, thank God she wasn't available because like that's clearly not sustainable and is not actually going to work. And essentially, like, you actually have to work on yourself, Chandler, over a period of time. What a concept.
Oh, I'm so excited.
I know,
though,
me
for,
too.
Like season 3, or end of season 2, I should say. Things are gonna get so good for Chandler. I just can't wait. Okay, no spoilies.
Yeah, no spoilies, Emily. Calm down.
I just said I'm excited for Chandler. Great.
But anyway, so I just find that interesting, and especially like the solution to him not being alone is this one person that he feels like he needs to settle with. But anyway, thank God that doesn't happen.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on because we kind of bounced around. So we talked actually quite a bit about the next few scenes.
Yeah.
Of course, like there's the whole thing going on with Monica and Rachel, which like is the least interesting plot line of this episode. It's still funny.
It's funny, mostly because I see you and me in that plot line. Like if we...
Am I the Monica?
I think we're both the Monica, and like in our own ways, we could both be the ones like being like, no, that's not allowed in our household. That's actually my household.
Yeah, for sure. This like claim on our own stuff
and controlling the environment. Yes, this is totally. Both.
And I do think they do like a good juxtaposition of like a juxtaposition of like Monica and Ross, where like you see this like they both have this need to control this situation.
Yeah.
That like no, this is the way it's gonna be, you know?
Yes. They're so obviously siblings. So now, should we talk about the second to last final scene with the debate of this sexual or fat-phobic joke?
Yeah. Let's get into that.
Okay. So we're in the second to last scene. We're in Mr. Heckles' apartment. It's finally all cleared out, just about, and they're all going to leave. And they're kind of like, and Monica stops and is like, hey, should we all say goodbye to the house and Mr. Heckles, blah, blah, blah. And then walks around to the magnifying glass that is about hip height. And then they all start laughing at her as she's trying to make this sentimental, speech of some sort. And anyway, and then she like gets mad at them and is like, you're all going to hell or something like that. Or maybe not quite. Mm-hmm. But Emily, do you want to put some...
She did say that. She says you're all going to hell.
Okay. Did you want to put more context to that, or is that enough,
No, that's good. I think it would be good to bring up the fact that like this, the reason why we're bringing this up specifically is because in our watch party, little plug for our watch parties.
Yeah,
if you
we had a lovely
every
watch
second
party.
Tuesday.
Yeah,
every second Tuesday we have watch parties for our Patreons. So it doesn't matter how much money you give us in a month, you can join our little exclusive. Yeah, I'm using the word exclusive.
Ooh.
Watch parties every Tuesday. That we watch the episode of Friends together and we chat and we come up with the poll questions. So if you want to be a part of that poll question making, you should come to our watch party.
Yep.
That plug aside, what comes up is what came up in our conversations was that we, one of our patrons was like, this is a fat phobic joke. And Quinn was also like, yeah, this is a fat phobic joke. But me and another one of the Patreons were like, actually, we thought it was like a sexual joke. Like her vagina basically is being magnified. And so that's the funny part, like the part that like her, like it's like almost like zooming in on her vagina while she's making this like intense speech. Whereas in your eyes, it was supposed to be like this idea of like, she looks fat behind this.
It was like,
questionably
possibly that. And and so there was kind of like a little bit of like I wouldn't say a debate, but like a discussion how like I think half of us were sort of like, oh, I sort of first took it as more of like a fat phobic joke. And then on the other side, people were like, actually, I took this as more of like a sexual joke. And you know what?
So what did our polls say?
So our polls said 71% sexual and 29% said fat phobic.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So then I went on to fandom, and to add more to this, I went on to fandom, and someone wrote that this is in reference to her ass being big. So in that case, it is fat phobic. But this is also just someone on fandom. So
right.
It's interesting, like it's interesting to not know what the writers were going on for this. But like it's not like if it's not fat phobic, then they've never been fat phobic on the show. It's
Right.
not like,
Oh my God, yeah.
It's not like they're not afraid to do fat jokes. You know what I mean? Like they will go there. So it's not like it's like
Yeah, so it doesn't like write them off. But I'm also just gonna put something out there, a revolutionary concept over here, that like maybe it's just a joke, because like, and I say that because like maybe it's just them being silly is really what I mean, because like in past episodes, like Joey was really in love with the Thing. And he likes silly things in general. And then also earlier in the episode, there was like a brief funny moment where he's standing in front of it, and he's like, "Ooh," kind of thing. Like he thinks it's funny. And so, like,
okay, so you mean like a joke, like the concept of a thing that magnifies?
Yeah, like maybe
funny.
it's just because it's silly, like, in like a carnival, like Hall of Mirrors type of thing, where it's just like, you're being warped and stuff, and that has been like a point of amusement for forever, seeing your body in like weird ways. Maybe it's just that, it's just silly.
Except I think the writers had an intention with it, because as Monica's like annoyed with them and walks out, Rachel shouts after her. She goes, "Oh, come on, it's not that big."
Right, that's true.
So there's definitely another layer to the joke. It's not just like being silly, like
right. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But anyway,
or maybe it was just especially funny because now it was a woman and it wasn't just Joey fooling around with it, and suddenly then it turns into a fat phobic or sexual joke. Anyway.
Right. Anyways.
Because that was like the kicker of that series of people in front of that thingy. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay. Well, actually, if you hadn't watched the DVDs, you wouldn't have had seen that. It comes up in the episode where they lose Marcel and Heckles takes Marcel, but it's a deleted scene that's not actually available on Crave or when it was on Netflix. Okay, so we have one last thing to do before we finish up. Quinn, who do you think is the best friend of this episode?
Oh, damn. I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough. It's not obvious.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, I would think Phoebe, but not Phoebe, because she kind of just like, goes on this whole thing and kind of just like fucks with Ross, like on purpose, which, is fun, but not the best.
Chandler wasn't really a friend to anyone. He was just going through his own thing.
Yeah, But at the same time,
Monica was not great because she was trying to destroy Rachel's lamp.
being controlling. Ross also was being controlling. Joey was,
fine.
Not helpful to Ross when, not helpful to Chandler when he needed emotional support. Who's left? Rachel was just Rachel. I still would like to nominate Chandler as friend, like best friend of the episode.
Oh my God, Quinn, that's 2 episodes in a row that we're going to nominate Chandler.
What? Really? Oh my God.
That's huge.
That's
huge. Intense.
Oh no. It's like, I don't know. Okay, anyway. I think that we should nominate Chandler because like, other people support him and stuff, but I do think that like there's a certain amount of like him figuring himself out, which is an important part of being a good friend, is also taking your self-awareness and trying to do something about it.
Okay, so that's it. We are What the Phalange. You can find us on our Instagram, WT Phalange Podcast. You should follow us there because, as we said, every second Tuesday we do polls, and your opinion will be featured on our podcast. Also, if you aren't already a Patreon, we would love to have you be a part of our community, our Smelly Cat community. We have some things that are potentially coming up in the next few months of things that we will be doing just exclusively for our Patreons alone. And we would love for you to be a part of that. If you cannot send us monies in the month by being a Patreon, you can still support us by, 1, sharing us to all the people who who watch Friends, as well as going over to iTunes or, Apple Podcasts or anywhere where you listen to podcasts and giving us a review because it helps people find us. And that way you can talk to more people about how great our show is. That being said, my name is Emilie. You can find me on my Instagram at EmilieBYoga or on my website, emiliebyoga.com. That is Emilie with an I-E, not a Y.
And you can find me, Quinn, at quinnkbrunet.com or with the handle, the basic NB, or the other handle, Mind Body with Quinn, on Instagram. Keep deconstructing
And diversifying
the media you consume.